This video is to announce that we are launching a full school to replace conventional schooling this year. But it's not a typical school that you would expect when you imagine a school. That's why we call it a neo school. So the rest of this video is about what problems are we trying to solve with this school that replaces schooling full-fledged. Let's jump in. Now, one of the things you're probably curious about is what are the problems this school is solving? And every single time I talk to somebody, everybody in fact has opinions of all the problems in education. And the issue is you can never ever solve all of them together. It's like boiling the ocean. So it's really important to stay focused on the top problems. And the top problems we've identified are: first, schools today do not prepare children with the knowledge and skills required to actually handle the real world. Second important problem, their structures are so theoretical and bookish that the knowledge children receive, even the knowledge they do receive, is really, really bookish, and they're not able to apply it enough. They have no idea where it applies and how to apply it. The third problem, conventional schooling, the way it's done today, is having negative impacts on children's mental health and mental well-being. And how we're going to solve this is going to be the rest of this video. But before we jump in case you're new to this channel, my name is Aanand Srinivas. I'm the former content head of Khan Academy, where I work with a bunch of schools to make it so that they solve these problems through the school itself. Before that, I was a teacher and a physics, science, and math educator whose videos have been viewed like multiple times on platforms like Khan Academy, YouTube, Byju's, millions of times, and they've been translated to multiple languages. That's probably how some of you have seen me before. And before that, I was a CS engineer from NIT Trichy. I had a particular interest towards cognitive science and psychology at that point. And before that, I was just a student who was many times pissed off with the way education was done to me, both in school and in college. So in 2019-20, what I did was I quit Khan Academy to co-found StayQrious. It's a YC company with a mission to re-engineer education from first principles of learning science, which is basically the science of how the brain learns, to make education much more relevant to the real world children are going to enter, and to make it much more in line with scientific research on how the brain actually learns. And our approach to solving these problems is to think like a physics student from first principles and ask, hey, why is it not working today? And what we learned is that education today is not failing at the vision or the policy layer or even at the board layer like CBSE, IGCSE, IB. None of that matters as much as how it's being implemented on the ground. Education today is failing at the implementation layer. That's what we learned. And we learned that we're failing to solve it because we're treating it too much like a social problem and not enough like an engineering problem. So we're trying to look at it as an engineering problem. Let's take that implementation layer. Where is the time going? Who are the people at the ground layer? What is the content? And make it so that if we solve each of those individual pieces, the problem does get solved. Let's start with the most important problem, which is the schools are not providing the knowledge and skills actually required for the real world. This is one of the most important jobs we hire our schools for, right? To prepare our child to confidently take on the real world. Now, to do this, first job is, what are these new skills and knowledge that are to be prioritized? It seems like there's so many, right? And the world is changing rapidly. Maybe just be paralyzed and do what we've already done. Or we can be methodical in picking these. That's what we've done. In the Neo School, what students spend their time on is broken into 4 buckets for this real world skills and knowledge part. And where does this come from? It comes from the World Economic Forum's predictions of what's going to be important, what's important today, and what's going to be increasingly important in the future. And the 4 buckets broadly are emotional intelligence, where you learn how to be resilient, how to handle situations where a 25-year field dies. What are you going to do? Second is social skills of working with people, empathy, active listening, being able to have leadership skills, things like these. The third is independence, self-learning, self-efficacy, I think they call it, where, hey, can you manage your own time? Can you be curious and be a lifelong learner where you keep learning? And it's clear why it's going to matter more, right? Because fields are going to change so rapidly that if you can learn a thing on your own, it's so much more important than before. Can you manage your own time? Things like those. And the last one, in some ways, one of my favorites, is actually critical thinking and creative problem solving. Can you actually separate fake news from real news? Can you critically analyze information without buying into it, blindly? Can you approach complex problems creatively? These are the 4 buckets into which all the skills that are needed, we've bucketed it. And people who are able to be closer to the future or have made their jobs to see the future, like Yuval Harari, who's a historian that you might all be familiar with, calls out that being able to self-learn and being able to handle emotionally the kind of uncertainties that none of our generations even used to are going to be the most important. Elon Musk constantly puts out, hey, critical thinking is just not being taught enough. We're believing that it's all not so important. Sam Altman, who's has the opportunity to see what the post-AI world is going to look like, has also expressed needs to teach these kind of skills a lot more than before. Now, one of the things that I commonly hear when we look at skills like emotional resilience, social skills, working with people, there are people who tell me that, oh, this life teaches this, the world will teach this, the schools can't teach this. And the problem with that approach is that it's wrong. The world does not teach social skills and emotional intelligence as much as it does not teach us Newton's laws and calculus, right? You can play with balls all your life and never come up with Newton's laws on your own. That's why we have methodical instruction for it. What the world can teach you is the wrong things. A lot of us who play with things end up learning the wrong physics, don't we? So what we've accepted in physics and math as things that can be taught methodically, that you can improve on it if there's a curriculum that teaches you step by step to get better, needs to be the same approach for emotional intelligence or social skills as well. We will take that methodical approach. And a lot of times, skills in these domains are actually knowledge in disguise. Just like skills in physics or engineering are knowledge in disguise. I'll give you an example. Somebody is afraid of something and they're not able to handle their anxiety, and somebody else is. The difference might be knowing, say, a CBT technique, for example, like downward arrow. Hey, can I find out the root cause of my anxiety? And somehow the second person looks more skilled, but they just know more. Similarly, somebody in social skills domain knows something called the disarming technique, where they know how to take unfair criticism when it's thrown to them. In the case of independence or self-learning, there are students who know elaborative interrogation, a technique to ask curious questions and learn new things in a way that you learn it deeply. And those who don't know that will look like they're struggling with the material. They don't have learning skills, but a lot of times it's knowledge of these techniques, practice on these techniques, and feedback that actually helps you get better. And so even if you take the critical thinking or creative problem solving, they're knowing the cognitive biases that make people exploit those biases to make emotionally manipulate us, helps you be aware of it and catch, hey, that's a manipulative news piece. I should not fall for that. So knowledge is a lot of times behind what looks like skills. And that means that in order to teach these, and if you're truly serious about it, we can't just put in some vision, curriculum, document and leave it at that. What really matters is how much of the students' time, energy and effort is going into learning, practicing and mastering these. And the main change we've made is a revamp of the curriculum entirely in the new school, where 30 to 40% time is kept aside for it, because we realized that teaching these methodically is both important and going to be time and energy consuming. Now, if you do that, and then if you train the teachers to learn that, hey, this is a big part of your role, maybe the most important part of your role, and give them the tools, the content, the plans necessary to execute it, then they can succeed. And that's what we've done over the last 4 years of R&D at StayQrious, to revamp this curriculum and make it so that teachers' role and resources are available for them to actually succeed in providing these. Now, one of the questions you may have is, hey, but doesn't science and math and all those core subjects matter? And some people have told me that in the age of Google and ChatGPT, these don't matter. They are wrong. That's not true. It's a common myth. We do believe it matters, just that not in the way it's being taught by conventional schooling today, whichever board it is. So what we have done is take in the remaining 60% of the time, the core knowledge areas of each of these subjects and make it so that you learn it deeply and practically rather than theoretically and rote memorization way. The problem is not that we're teaching these things in schools, we're teaching them too theoretically. Now, how do you achieve this? Make it much more project-based and make it learning science tasks-based. So there are learning science tasks and projects that make it so that you learn this both deeply and in a way that you're learning how to apply it and you're being curious about it. Now, what are examples of these projects and learning tasks? That's going to come in the demo just in a bit. Now that you have revamped the curriculum, pick the most important knowledge and skills that matter to the real world, set aside enough time for it. It'll still fail if you just teach this in the same theoretical way that schools teach. It'll become another moral science or life skills period that we all are aware does nothing, right? So how do you solve this problem? But before that, why are schools like this? Their structure is such that this typical 1:30 whatever environment makes it so that it's really hard to be active in the learning. So it's 80% passive lecture led. It's very low on collaboration. It subtly promotes competition, in fact. And it's very low on actionable feedback. Other than an exam somewhere where you get some number, it doesn't really tell you much about what to do. But as you can clearly see, to learn the kind of knowledge and skills we are talking about here, you need a practical environment where you can really do these things and get feedback. It needs to be collaborative, because a lot of these social skills, how do you learn? I can't lecture you about it. You have to be in a role where you have to do it, see that you're not doing well, get feedback and get better over multiple exposures. And it has to be high on actionable feedback that you can actually know what to change to get better. How do you design such an environment though? How do you go from this oneness to something passive kind of environment that we are so used to such a practical, high feedback, high collab environment? Now, to solve this, what we saw was that a lot of freshers who join the workplace are first time introduced to the real world. They meet diverse people, they have to ship projects, they do a lot of things. And within the next 3 to 4 years, they develop both the technical skills, how to apply it, and the social skills required to thrive. So the question we started with is, if the real world is what helps you learn anyway, why wait 15 years to give you access to that? Why can't we give you an access to a simulation of that with more support so that you can get exposed to the real world at age 8, 9 rather than wait all the way to finish college to get that? Now, that question is what our entire implementation design was created. It's basically a simulation of the real world workplace where you join a team of 7 to 8 people. You have a coach, kind of like a manager, and an assistant coach who's like kind of like a team lead. You have daily stand-ups. You have projects with deadlines. You have one-on-ones with your manager to figure out like what's going well, what's not. You sometimes work alone, like you do in office, and sometimes you have workshops, which are more efficient meetings where you get work done together as a 7 to 8 member team. Now, this way, by the time students finish high school, they have 8 to 10 years of practical experience working on real world projects, working in a team of diverse people, getting feedback from both coaches and from their peers, shipping things on deadline, struggling, succeeding, making it so that one, right, they can say, hey, look at my body of work. Look at that evidence that I know data science and AI. I can implement it. Look at the evidence that I'm a good collaborator on so many projects. Look at the evidence that I can ship projects on deadline. I've done that like 30 times. And look at the evidence that not only do I know my core subjects really deeply, I also know how to apply them to real world contexts. All of which is going to remove their fear of entering the real world because they already have access to it. They're not waiting to see what it is. They already have years of experience on it. And now each time I mention this workplace analogy, it's so interesting and parents want to know details, deeper details of it. And like I said, right, they also try to ask, hey, which bucket does it fall under? Is it online schooling, offline schooling, hybrid schooling? My answer is that we're trying to think from first principles here. So we'll describe what we do to you and you can name it however you want. So the first core thing is that students are working remotely with diverse people for 3 to 4 hours a day, about 15 to 20 hour work week. Now, there are two important aspects of this. First is that they'll be meeting and interacting with students from diverse backgrounds, just like we're expected to do in the real world. And it starts with across the country and it can go across the world tomorrow. The second thing is all of their work related to learning is happening during those 3 to 4 hours, just like we all do work, which allows them to have work-life balance, one, which is something we're all getting, but they're not. Every hour of their child gets like regimented now. But the second thing is, we can see that we own all of their learning tasks so that they don't have this homework and other things where you're doing it. We don't know who's doing it. So all of it is happening during the work hours so that both they have work-life balance and we have transparency over who's working on these projects. A common joke that I hear is that all of the children who go to like very project-based environments, it's the parents who are submitting projects 5 to 6 times and then they're getting really good at it, but the students are not. So we're really interested in improving your students and not you, at least for now. So what does a typical day look like? So it starts to stand up for about 15 minutes, maybe at 8:30 a.m. And then you have 2 deep work sessions where you're working independently, alone, just concentration time. And a lot of times when people imagine working remotely, they think, oh, maybe they're just staring into a screen and like, that's kind of what the learning looks like. But that's only because during pandemic, what passive learning was happening offline was ported online. It was not taught from first principles. So what might they be doing in this 2 25-minute sessions of deep work? They might be working with a breadboard to make a circuit work. They're just focusing on their project, making it work. And the projects, like I said, we'll be sending kits to the house where students are actually literally working on a thing. They might be reading a physical book, a chapter that's going to be discussed later. They might be doing all of that, but once again, on our time, where a coach is also available on the side in case they need anything. 2 such sessions. Or they could be working on a resistance workout for 25 minutes because we think that's as core a part of being prepared for the future as, say, science or math. Then there are going to be 2 workshops, 45-minute workshops, where these are not classes. Why do we call them workshops? The big problem with schools and classes is that classes are very, very much like a solar system. Teacher at the center, students around, hey, you tell. There's unfairness. A lot of students don't like school, not even because the teacher is not knowledgeable, but because the teacher is unfair or partial. So what workshops are it's a group of people trying to get work done, facilitated by somebody. It's more like a constellation and less like a solar system. So what do you do in this? You come together, maybe you're discussing a problem together, or you're brainstorming ideas together, or you are shipping a project, or even debating something together. It's closer to a meeting in an office than it is to a classroom. So 2 of those. And then you get lunch. And then typically, if you do have a one-on-one with your coach, which is about bi-weekly, you have a deep one-on-one where you're discussing what's going well, you're getting coached one-on-one to get better at your job. Now, the first 2 problems are done. What about the third one? The mental health effects of conventional schooling on so many children. Classically, most of these schools are toxic environments for children. They hardly feel heard. They feel shut down constantly. There's too much competition in a way that they don't feel supported at all. And they have no one to really lean back on, and they really need that support because learning is hard. As much as we make it sound like learning is fun and exciting, learning is more like building muscle. It's essentially rewiring your brain. It is hard, and we hardly acknowledge that in the system and hardly provide the support. How do we solve that? So the way we've changed the model is make it so that there are no teachers in our school who have an agenda to finish the syllabus, but a coach who only handles a small group, whose only objective is, hey, I succeed if you succeed. So students get one-on-one coaching time with them, where the main purpose is for the students to feel heard when they have an issue, when they are struggling with something, and to get the support from a person who has no other agenda being behind what's going on. The second is that schools get really lonely and hyper competitive in a way that the real world is not. The real world is competitive, but you're not competing with every single person, you're actually collaborating. So what we do is these 8 people that they're in a team of, the 7 others, it's not they're competing against them to show who's best. We set this expectation that you're a tribe in this together, and together you might compete with other people, but you're here for each other. So they have a sense of tribe, of we're all like-minded people who have come together from different parts of the country to actually navigate this hard thing called learning. And that sense of tribe is something that so many students have told me, sir, I just don't have it anywhere. And the third and underrated piece is the actual knowledge and skills on how to handle it if your mental health is not going well. Emotional first aid of kinds, where do you know CBT technique, like just listing down your thoughts and being able to challenge them, the distortions, the downward arrow to find out what the source of your anxiety is. Little techniques like these that anybody can apply to themselves, giving them that. These 3 pieces of the design are what's going to make it so that their mental health is much more safe than in any other model of conventional schooling today. So the students are working remotely. Where is the physical connect? So when I joined Khan Academy as a remote employee, we worked remote, but we met physically once every few months in a deep offsite where we could bond really well and do really interesting things. That's what our school's modeled on. So what students do is they work remotely 3 to 4 hours a week, 3 to 4 hours a day, but once every few months they come together in a deep offsite, which can be a nature trip or an industry or NASA-like trip, or even a cultural trip to one of the students whose area is like really unique and to understand their culture. All of these become open. So physical connect is deep, highly focused on bonding, and happens less frequently. So this model of having a 15 to 20 hour real world work environment, meeting once every n months, fully physically, deeply in an offsite, and having a typical day that looks more like a modern employee of Google or OpenAI is what we are calling a Neoschool. And this makes it so that the main jobs we're hiring from school are never compromised in our attempts to get every other thing. It's kind of like inspired by a neobank. It helps you do all the things that a bank does that's most important to you without needing the other things. Hey, but isn't going to someplace physical, like a physical school, developing our social skills? It's a myth that schools develop social skills. In fact, a lot of times they impair it. They make you afraid to ask questions. They make it hard for you to like ask questions to new people, meet new people. There's a lot of shaming going on. A lot of times what happens in schools is the typical social environments that are there outside are not what schools are. They're unnecessarily disciplinarian, none of which resonates in the real world. So it's a myth that schools help you develop social skills. They help you behave in ways that are more convenient for schools. And what we need to do here is actually ask, how do you develop these social skills? Methodically getting opportunities to socialize that mimic the real world, simulate the real world, and getting feedback. Hey, that way you gave feedback, you can do it better this way. You can actually be more respectful when you disagree with someone. Getting that feedback is what actually helps you develop social skills. So it is a myth that schools provide these social skills. But it's only one of the myths we've accepted simply because we've heard it over and over again and never questioned it. It's a dogma. But the emperor is naked. And I think it's important to call it out. And what we're doing is to build a school that does its one job that schools are supposed to do really well, which is prepare children to confidently take on the real world. That's the most important job, instead of doing a bunch of things in a mediocre way. And I'm really excited to announce this. It's been a dream of mine for a long time that this school is real now, and it's open for ages 8 to 10. And the keen ones amongst you, I know will have a lot of questions that you want to dig in deeper. Put them in the comments and I'm happy to answer each and every one of them personally.